Hey there, Russ here. Welcome back to the shop. Okay, we're standing here at the table saw. I want to go over my miter gauge, and in particular my OTB fence. What we're going to do today, what I'm going to show you is about accurate measuring, which will include mounting and using the Incra Jig on the fence. But there's also other ways that you will use it. And there's a couple of concepts that I'm going to try to show you, so it helps you to understand how to make, whether you're using this fence system or a table saw sled or whatever, show you how you really know how to be able to make accurate cuts on your work without having to use what I call a static ruler. Your table saw does vary. That point of contact between the blade and your fence, whatever is back here, whether it's a table saw or sled or whether it's a miter gauge fence, that cursor area is going to get chewed up over time in that blade, and it gets further and further and further and further away. And as it gets further away, if you're measuring on the back of here, it's going to get more and more inaccurate. So let me show you some quick, easy way. While you're using the fence, you have the advantage to be able to set that 0.0 yourself every time in just a split second. And that's what we're going to kind of talk about a little bit. First, let's go over real quick my throat plate. And if you look at the throat plate here, I took and I've added some lines to it. So it sets in this way, so it has these arrows here. As you're coming up on your work, you'll be able to see, as egg slides by, you'll be able to see these things get exposed. Let's see if I can do this. You'll see things get exposed like that. First the arrows, then the black line, then another set of arrows and a red line. And what that's telling me, this point right here is the center of my saw blade. So that's going to be the highest point on the blade. So what I'm looking for is when the front of this reaches that point here on the back of it, I want to know where I'm at on the front without having to lean over and see. This will help me to see, because as I'm coming out the back and I'm seeing these things pop up, that tells me when I hit this line, I've reached that point right there on the front. It means that I really don't have to push any further forward. If I get to the red line, then the top of that is about 1 inch into my fence. Do I want to go all the way through? Sure, I can do that if I want. You don't necessarily have to, though. And the point of it, more than anything, is if you're going to take the blade and make it as high as you can get it and go all the way through, you're going to have that cut groove on your fence. And you want to make sure that whatever that height is, you still have some meat on top of your fence here. That's why this fence is set to 2 5/8, is because I use a 7 1/4 inch blade. If you're going to use a 10-inch blade instead, which is your choice, but if you're going to use a 10-inch blade instead of a 7 1/4, you're going to gain about 1 inch in height of the depth of cut. But you need to raise your fence too, probably 1.5 inches, to help compensate for that taller blade when it's going in and out. So when I told you this was 2 5/8 by 2 5/8, it's because I am using a 7 1/4. So keep that in mind, that you want to try to have 1 inch or 2, between 1 and 2 inches on the top, so that if that curve goes all the way through, your fence will still be in one piece. So, keeping that, all those things in mind, let's go over how to, let's talk about the 0.0 real quick. So now, 0.0 is that point of contact between the 0.0 on this blade is if I want to make a cut on this side of my, if I want to cut this piece, and this is the piece I've measured and I want to save and to be exactly cut, my 0.0 is going to be on this side of the blade, right at the point of the tip of that tooth. Not the flat part down below, but you're looking for that tooth. And in particular, there's 2 of them. They alternate offset. if you have one of those types of blades, then make sure you're also comparing to the tooth that is offset to that side. So if we bring this up, and I bring this thing over until this edge is just touching that blade. Now I'm assuming this is 90 degrees, which I know it is. That tells me that right there this is now set right at 0.0. And if I look at my kerf down here, this piece here is actually sticking into that kerf area. It's not right on the edge, and that's because of this adjustment. If I want to use this cursor as my 0.0 reference, I can do that. All I have to do is I bring my piece up, and because this thing slides, I can just loosen my two pieces, lean over the top, look for the right tooth, and now that I am right there where I can see that tooth, I now can bring this fence over until it is just touching that blade. And if I snug it back down, now my 0.0 is set right on that edge, on that side. That is my 0.0. So I can measure from here back, measure to be able to set a piece in here and set a block. I can now measure. That can be a reference point. After I've used it for a while, that may chew that away a little bit, and that'll actually be further away. And if you're doing several cuts from this, you want to make sure that if that's your reference point and you're moving this and trying to do new measurements off of that and you're still using it, that becomes undependable for your 0.0. So you want to check that very closely. I always check for where I'm going to establish my 0.0 anytime I sit down to or stand up and get on my table saw. I will bring it up. I'll take the 1 minute, bring it up, and I'll set this to 0.0 somewhere on here, and then I know that my 0.0, I can reference that for any cuts I do while I'm here. So, and then if I leave, tomorrow I come back and I use my table saw again, I will do again, I will check where that 0.0 is still. If it's not, I make an adjustment on my fence to make it work, make it where it needs to be. So, as far as the way I normally would do a 0.0, if I want to, let's say for example, let's get down to the nitty gritty. Let's talk about that Incra Jig. Now we're going to set that up here. We have a 0.0 set on our fence right here. So now we're going to set up our jig and calibrate it, and it only takes about 1 minute to do this. Knowing this is our 0.0, let's make this simple. And I'm going to put a stop block on here because we use a stop block in conjunction with our jig, and you'll see how that works here in a minute. But I'm going to bring my block up, and I'm going to put my finger right on that hole right there just to hold that so I can move that with my fingertip, gently pushing against here. And I'm going to bring that over. I'm going to use my left hand. And I'm going to bring that over until that is at 0.0. Now, if I want to save my fence, what I normally would do here is I'm actually going to loosen this up. And rather than tearing up and making my cursor here wider, I'm just going to set this in the middle so it never touches either side at this point. Because rather than using this for my 0, I am going to set a temporary 0 using my stop block. So I'm going to bring it up, and I'm going to set that right up next to that tooth, and then pushing straight in, and I'm using my thumb to pull on the track so that I'm holding this nice and straight in. I'm not pulling it there, but it's just barely touching because that's what I did when I did this. And now that it's there, I know where to push it in place, and then I just tighten my knob down. I now have, this is my 0.0. This edge right here is set to my 0.0. So now we can calibrate and set up our Incra Jig. So I'm going to take my fence, and I need 1 T-bolt, which will go in the track we're going to open this up all the way to 0 and lock it down on what's going to be 0. Now that I'm totally lined up to my 0 mark, I now can take and I put this, we'll move it to this side. I could hang it over this way, or I could hang it over the back side. And we're going to line up these slots to one of these pre-drilled 1/4-inch holes. And then I take a small wood dowel, and I'm going to use this one right here, so that I can drop that on there. And this thing now can slide on that wood dowel. It doesn't go side to side, it only goes this way. Now I can put this T-track in there, and I drop it into the slot of the whole thing. If you can see it here, I have this right here, these 2 slots, and I just drop this into the slot. And now I'm going to turn this and pivot it on that pin until this is pretty much set straight in line here. And now that it's in line, I just hold it down and I just snug this down till it feels pretty snug. And at that point, I am now pretty much, this thing isn't going to go anywhere, and it's now set. But I didn't set it to 0 here. So now let's loosen this up just enough to be able to move it. And now we're going to push it up gently, not hard, just barely touching it. Making sure it's parallel at the front and the back here against my face. And I tighten it down. And just that quick, I am now set to 0 here. So if I move this away and I'm set to 0, I set this here and lock it down, and I bring it up, and I am set just barely right there at my block on my tooth still. So I can move my block. So let's move this real quick to 2 inches. 1, 2. And now that I have it on 2 inches, I'm going to slide my block over again. I do it this way so I know that it's not binding or twisting. I just hold one finger there and I gently move it to where it just barely touches. And I can feel it when it touches. Now I just push it straight back, knowing that it's touching there. And now I am now set to 2 inches. Are we set to 2 inches? Well, let's quickly take my 2-inch block. If you remember this, my magic block that I used to make boxes, 1.5 inches this way, 2 inches this way. So I'm going to put my 2-inch block in there and bring it up, and lo and behold, I don't know if you can hear that. As that tooth goes by, you can hear it barely touching that other piece. So I moved this to 2 inches, and now I have it set to 2 inches. Anytime I want to set this now, anywhere from the blade, 0 point exactly, all the way back to 8 inches. I have an 8-inch accurate measuring device right here. Now right now I have the 2 teeth off of this, and if you notice, it just slides nice and easy. And the reason I did that is so that I could get this most of the time. This scale is what makes it really nice, because this guy can see, looking down, the way it's split up, you can see it all the way down to a 32nd of an inch to be able to line it up to here. And that's when you're measuring where your stop is going to be. And this scale is very accurate and easy to read down to the 32nd of an inch. I don't really need the teeth. If I'm going to do something like a finger joint, then I would put the teeth on it. Well, actually, what I would do is take this one off. You may or may not know this about these things, but one thing that's really cool about them is I have 3 of them that are gray. All the components interchange between each other. So this one has the teeth on it. So I can put this one on here, and guess what? Now I have the teeth. So if I put this one on there, I now can do finger joints with this. I wouldn't do finger joints with it free, but with the incremental, now I could safely do finger joints and they would come out accurate. But I give up a little bit on how easy it is to move it back and forth by having the teeth on there. So most of the time, I'll probably use this half, but if I'm going to do something where I really want it to lock in exactly on, not a thousandths off in either direction, that's when the incremental shines. So if I was doing finger joints, then I know exactly where I'm going and it locks it down rather than having to tap and try to line that up. That gets a little bit more tedious, even though I can pretty well line it up to the mark. You can still be either slightly on the mark or slightly on the edge. So you got 2 or 3 thousandths that I can fudge with it this way. But this way, there's no fudging at 2 or 3. It's locking down exactly on 32 1/32 of an inch increments. So, and there's times when this is an advantage. So now that I have this on here, if I bring it out and set it down and lock it in, it locks in right at the 2 inch. Right there. So, let me make sure I'm on there. Am I? One thing, yeah. That's one thing about the teeth. You really got to pay attention to get it down on the right tooth, or you'll be a tooth off. You can see it, but trying to set it in place sometimes when you're using the teeth, it gets a little bit sticky to do it. So I reset it with my incremental at the 2 inch, and now I put this in there, and there we are, barely touching it. I don't know if you can hear that or not, but it's barely touching it again. So I switched this out. I set it to 2 inch using the increment, and I still get that same accuracy. So once I had this locked down like this, I can use this on here. Now I can take it. The way I designed this is I did take and I put pre-drill holes. I have 5 of them here, 2 inches apart. That's to give me a little leeway of where on here I set this. So if I take and slide this thing over, for example, if instead of using this, if I set this out here to the edge and line it up this way so that this is my 0 point, I can still take this and drop this in. Whoops. Put this all the way up. Put this on 0. And let's see, where do we have a hole? Oh, we have one right here. So I just put it in that hole. And I put this back on here. Line it up parallel. And just snug this down. And now, you know what? Let me use the other block. It's a little skinnier. That actually is pretty close. Now let's, Now let's set this up to 0. Slide it in. I'm gently against there. Make sure that I'm pretty much parallel. And parallel doesn't have to be exact. They're contacting each other at one point so that when I tighten this down, it's always touching that same point. It doesn't have to touch parallel to each other particularly, but now it is making contact. So when I snug this down, this is my 0.0 now, is this block. So if I wanted to do a 2-inch cut this way, or a 4-inch cut, I would move this to 4 inches. Move my block to 4 inches up against it. And I now have a 4-inch. I now have 4 inches from here to there. So I have quickly taken and used this in a different position by using different holes and only one T-bolt to lock this thing in place. And this thing is now locked completely in place no matter where I set it up. And it only takes a second for me to find what I call 0.0 to calibrate this to 0 to begin with. So, as you can see, and also because of the way I designed it with multiple holes, I can put this anywhere on here. I could actually take and turn it around this way and use these holes to line up to. So I still have all these holes I can line up to from either direction. I can move this whole thing over. So again, like always, it is totally ambidextrous for what you need. When I don't need that, I just take the pin out. I take the T-bolt off. And I put this away because I'm not using it. So that's how you use the jig on your system. Now I have taken and made a couple, I made a second stop block. Let's set this up real quick. In what I call my normal mode. Right here would be normal mode, where I bring it up, I set it between the two cursors, not touching either one, and lock it down. And this is my, where I'm going to take all my cuts and normal cuts. Now when I'm going to use it, I use one stop block in conjunction with my blade. And if I want to put something in here to make a particular cut, again, I'm just going to use my 2-inch, but I could do this easily with a, in fact, let's just do this. So I'm going to set and make a 6-inch cut real quick. And I can mark one piece, put it in here, make my mark on this side where my blade is, bring my piece over, bring my blade up until I can see that I'm lined up. If I want to get it a little bit more accurate than that, rather than using this, I can take my ruler and set it in here, bring this up, and now I can take my 6-inch and line this thing up very accurately right to my 0 point. And now that I've established that 0 point, I can bring this over right up next to it, hold it in place, and gently lock it down. And now, if I bring this up, that is lined up perfect to 6 inches. So I now have 6 inches. I use this to set my distance quickly and instantly rather than trying to use my cursor to do it in most cases. If you want to use this because of what you're doing, that's not a problem, but remember that will change over time because that will wear away and it'll make it larger and larger. You can also move this over and get a brand new spot for a new cursor. I don't know why you would want to keep putting those in. Rather than using your cursor as your landmark, I just use the blade by bringing it up, and then I can measure this out very closely and accurately, and I can get a good view of just using a ruler or a tape measure or anything to make the cut I want, whatever length I want between these two. Now, one of the things that is also nice about these stop blocks is you have the ability to actually use this in multiple different positions. So rather than using it as a stop block, let's use it as a mini fence. So if I turn it around this way and put this all back on, Let's put it on this way. And I put this on here. Now if I have to do a quick cut this way, rather than just depending on this, I can set mine where I want my cut, bring my fence over, and when I'm comfortable with this, then I just lock it down right here, like so. Again, all my pressure, I'm trying to push it flat against here. I don't worry about it being square this way. I care that it's square here, but I don't care if it's not square here, because this edge is only going to make, the edge of this thing is only going to make contact at one level. So even if it's tipped, I'm lined up there and I'm touching, I'm going to get the accurate cut as long as it doesn't move. And that's why you locked it down. And now I'm ready to make a long cut on here instead of doing it this way. So you can turn these things around and use them like this instead of as a normal block. The other improvement I've made here recently, I should mention, is I took, if you remember these knobs, and I took one of them. When I made the second block, I made it with this. And what I like about this is I can now put this anywhere on here. After I do all my setup and I'm ready to do cuts, I can slip this on here so it's not in the way of my face, and now I have a nice little handle to push and pull back on my cuts. So whenever you're making a cut, if you can, one habit you want to get into is you want to be able to push your work forward until you hit the stop, wherever that is. Whether it's that stop up there, or I'm looking at it here. When I know I've gone past, I know the cut is complete, rather than trying to drag this piece back, I would just let go of it, pull back, and then reach up and pull my piece away from the blade and bring it back, and then do it on this side. That is the best way to make your cut. It's quick, easy. You get a cleaner cut, because when you run it both ways on the blade, sometimes you'll make little nicks or something can go wrong when you're pulling it back. So since you're using a fence, once that goes past, leave it there and just pull back, and then just reach up and pull the piece back by pulling it away from the blade as you pull it back. The other thing I should mention to you is that if you're using your fence this way and you got it in your position that you want, and you're ready to make your cut of your piece here, you can always grab your little gripper and set it in here up against there, so that I can push this through using my pad. If you're worried about staying in your marks, which you want to do if you have a regular gripper like mine, then what you can do is pull this up here. Let me get a little closer so that I'm within the width of this thing. And as you know, if I put this on one way and push it through, leaning against the fence, it'll go on the black area. You want to stay away from going through on the red areas, because that's where the leg is on your gripper. And that's what's holding them when you hold down on it. So I just bring this up to a point where I can check this, and I can look and see that when it's against the fence, I'm in the black area there. So I'm going to keep my X, which marks which way my handle is. My X is going to be away from me every time I use this, as long as my fence is here. So now I can take my piece, set it there, take this, set it there. And when everything is nice and straight, I can take this, push down on it, push back against there all at one time, and now I can take and make my cut and lift up, let go, and bring the pieces back one at a time, and you're good to go. So this works real well with or without the fence, quite frankly. If I wanted to do this cut, I could take a gripper
have it marked for one area through this way, and always line that up to my cursor, to my blade, I could take this and put it on any piece and hold it down while I'm pushing it through to give me a much better than me putting my hands down there. This thing works real well with the OTB fence. So, anyway, I've been going on for a very long time here. I'm sorry this turned out so long. I think I've already told you about this. It's pretty self-explanatory for putting it in front of the blade. And you can put this on and off as when you use it. It only takes you a second to put it on every time. And it never seems to be in the way of anything else that you want to do on here. So this is the way I'm going with it. The next video I do will be about the donkey's ear. And I have some really good things with that. And we're going to take and actually make something. We're going to make a 4-sided frame instantly at 45 degree for miter cuts on this thing, and I'll show you how to set it up, how to make those cuts, and how to make sure they're 100% accurate no matter what length they are. There's a way of doing it, and you don't need to put a stop block so that you know that you're cutting it to the right length. All that is taken out of the equation, so you're not going to make any mistakes while you're cutting your 45. So stay tuned for that. That'll be a good one. Hopefully it won't be as long as this. But sometimes I do get carried away, as you know, with what's going on. If you learned something here or you like this video, hit that like button. But most importantly, please come back again because I'm nowhere near done. Hey, and don't forget to leave those comments, okay? Thanks. We'll talk to you guys again soon.